You think your home is a fortress because of the $3,000 alarm system and the steel locks. I thought so too. I build safe houses for a living, yet I made a fatal error. By building walls to keep the world out, I created a hollow space for him to look back in. He was already inside eating my food and watching my daughter sleep. Listen closely, because that breathing you hear tonight is not the wind. My name is Christopher Miller. I am 42 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I have made a living designing places where people cannot be found. I am a forensic architect. In my line of work, we do not build for aesthetics. We build for survival. I spent years working for a private security contractor, drafting blueprints for safe houses in unstable regions, creating panic rooms that could withstand rocket-propelled grenades, and designing ventilation systems that could filter out nerve gas. I know every way a human being can force entry into a structure, and conversely, I know exactly how to keep them out. When I retired from the field to raise my daughter Maya, I decided to build my masterpiece. I chose a plot of land deep in the Oregon wilderness, surrounded by miles of dense pine that swallows sound and light alike. I built a brutalist structure, a monolith of raw concrete and reinforced steel. I did not trust digital security. I have seen 15-year-old hackers disable million-dollar smart homes with a laptop and a bag of chips. My home is analog. It operates on mechanics, gravity, and physics. Heavy deadbolts, pressure sensors beneath the floorboards, and solid steel bars. It was supposed to be impenetrable. It was supposed to be the safest place on Earth. It was 3:17 in the morning when the illusion broke. I was in my study, a soundproofed box on the ground floor, where the silence is so absolute you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. The only light came from the drafting table lamp, casting long, sharp shadows against the exposed concrete walls. I was reviewing old schematics, losing myself in the clean, predictable lines of geometry. The world outside was pitch black, the kind of darkness you only get when the nearest streetlight is 10 miles away. I felt secure. I felt like the king of my own private castle. Then my phone lit up on the desk. It did not ring. I keep it on silent. It just pulsed with a cold blue light that cut through the warm, yellow glow of the lamp. I glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. The screen displayed a notification from Maya. My stomach tightened. Maya was 15. She knew the rules. She knew we did not use phones after 10 at night, and she certainly never texted me from her bedroom upstairs unless it was an emergency. I picked up the phone. The message was short. "Dad, someone is breathing in my closet. Help me." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. A normal father might have panicked. He might have yelled out, run up the stairs stomping his feet, or called 911 immediately. But I am not a normal father. Panic is a luxury for people who believe help is coming. In my experience, help usually arrives to draw the chalk outlines. I did not yell. I did not freeze. I switched off. That is the only way I can describe it. The part of me that was Christopher Miller, the suburban dad who grilled burgers on Sundays, receded into the back of my mind. The other part, the architect of secrets, took over. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. My hand found the grip of the Sig Sauer P320 without looking. It was loaded. It was always loaded. I checked the chamber, a habit ingrained from years in the field, and moved toward the door. I did not wear shoes in the house, which was an advantage now. My socks moved silently over the polished concrete floor. I paused at the security panel in the hallway. It was an old-school display with physical needles and lights wired directly to the sensors. I scanned it. The perimeter sensors were green. The window sensors were green. The pressure plates in the hallway upstairs showed 0 weight. According to the house I had designed, there was no one inside but us. This meant one of two things. Either Maya was having a vivid nightmare, or the person inside my house was good, better than good. They were professional. I moved up the stairs. I kept my weight on the outer edges of the steps, right where the steel stringers supported the concrete, minimizing even the slightest chance of a creak, though I knew these stairs were solid. The house was silent. Not the peaceful silence of earlier, but a heavy, holding its breath kind of silence. I reached the second-floor landing. The corridor stretched out before me, bathed in the faint gray moonlight, filtering through the clerestory windows. I raised the weapon, keeping it close to my chest, scanning the shadows. Nothing. The pressure sensors were not malfunctioning. The hallway was empty. I moved toward the last door on the left, Maya's room. I did not knock. If there was an intruder knocking, would give away the element of surprise. I gripped the handle, turned it slowly to disengage the latch, and pushed the door open in one fluid motion, leading with the gun barrel. "Maya," I whispered, my voice low and controlled. The room was dark, smelling of vanilla candles and old books. A lump under the quilt on the bed was shaking violently. I scanned the corners of the room. Clear. Under the desk. Clear. Behind the curtains. Clear. I moved to the bed and placed a hand on the trembling mound. Maya gasped and threw the covers off her eyes, wide and wet with tears. She was pale, her face a mask of absolute terror. She pointed a shaking finger toward the walk-in closet across the room. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of blackness visible between the frame and the wood. "He's in there," she mouthed, barely making a sound. "I heard him." I nodded, signaling her to stay put. I stepped away from the bed, leveling the Sig Sauer at the closet door. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a slow, heavy thud, but my hands were steady. I calculated the angles. If he rushed out, I had a clear shot. If he had a hostage, I had a problem. But the closet was deep. I approached the door. I could not hear anything yet. I reached out with my left hand, grabbed the handle, and yanked it open, stepping back to create distance. "Police! Show me your hands!" I shouted the lie, coming naturally. Silence. I waited a beat, then sliced the pie, moving in a semicircle, to clear the interior visually before entering. Nothing. Just rows of hoodies, dresses, and shelves of sneakers. I stepped inside the closet. I pushed the clothes aside with the barrel of the gun, checking for anyone hiding behind the hanging fabrics. Empty. I checked the ceiling hatch. It was sealed with paint untouched for years. I checked the floor for trapdoors, though I knew there were none because I had poured the foundation myself. There was no one here. The only thing in the closet was the scent of lavender fabric softener and the stillness of inanimate objects. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. I lowered the gun, engaging the safety. I turned back to Maya, who was still sitting up in bed, clutching the duvet to her chin. "It is empty, sweetheart," I said, my voice softening. I walked over and sat on the edge of her bed. "Look, there is no one there. The sensors did not trip. The windows are sealed." "I heard it, Dad," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It was loud. It was right there." "It was a nightmare," I assured her, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "The wind in the pines can sound like voices sometimes. Or maybe the house is just settling. Concrete expands and contracts with the temperature." I was using logic to fight fear. It usually worked. I saw her shoulders relax slightly. She looked past me at the open closet door, then back at me, wanting to believe me. "You promise?" she asked. "I promise," I said. "I built this house to keep you safe. Nothing gets in here unless I invite it." I smiled, a confident fatherly smile meant to banish the monsters. And then we both heard it. The sound cut through the silence like a razor blade. My smile froze. It was rhythmic, wet. It sounded like air being forced through a crushed windpipe. It was the sound of lungs, struggling to expand. And Maya was right. It was coming from the direction of the closet. But it was not coming from the closet. I stood up slowly, the hair on the back of my neck standing straight up. I raised the gun again, disengaging the safety. I moved back toward the closet, but this time, I did not look at the clothes. I tilted my head listening. The sound was vibrating. It was resonating through the structure itself. I stepped into the closet and pressed my ear against the back wall. This wall was not an external wall. It was a partition separating the bedroom from the main structural corridor, where the HVAC ducts ran. The drywall was cool against my skin. It was right there, on the other side of the plaster. Someone was not in the room. They were in the wall. I felt a cold shockwave travel down my spine. The HVAC system in this house was custom designed. The ducts were steel, wrapped in insulation, and buried behind layers of reinforced framing. There was no space for a human being. It was physically impossible. The clearance was less than 12 inches. And yet the breathing was there. Close. Intimate. "Dad?" Maya whispered, the terror returning to her voice, sharp and high. I held up a hand for silence. I needed to be sure. I pressed my ear harder against the drywall, straining to hear over the thumping of my own heart. The breathing stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. It meant he knew I was listening. He was listening back. We were separated by half an inch of gypsum board and a few inches of insulation. I was standing in a $3 million fortress, holding a gun, and the enemy was inside the architecture. Then a voice came. It did not sound human. It sounded tinny, distorted, as if it were traveling through a long metal tube, bouncing off the galvanized steel of the ventilation shafts before pressing against the wall. It was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a scream. "The structure." The voice rasped, the words slurring together, as if the speaker's mouth was damaged. I froze. My grip on the gun tightened until my knuckles turned white. "The structure has changed, Chris." My blood ran cold. He used my name. He did not call me Mr. Miller. He called me Chris. Only people from the old life called me that. And the way he said it, with a familiarity that made my skin crawl, shattered the last remnant of my composure. I backed away from the wall, slowly, keeping the gun trained on the blank white surface. The drywall, usually so solid now, looked paper-thin. I realized with a sickening jolt that I was not looking at a wall anymore. I was looking at a veil, and something was waiting on the other side, something that knew the blueprints better than I did. "Get up," I whispered to Maya, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." This was not a burglary. This was not a random break-in. This was personal. And as I stared at the wall, waiting for it to explode outward, I realized my first mistake. I had built a house to keep the world out, but I had forgotten to check if I had trapped something in with us. The breathing started again, louder this time, a mocking rhythm that synchronized with the ticking of the clock on the bedside table. He was enjoying this. He was in the veins of the house, circulating through the very air we breathed. And he was right. The structure had changed. It was no longer a home. It was a hunting ground. I did not waste time screaming back at the wall. Screaming is for victims, and tonight, I refused to be one. I grabbed Maya's arm, not gently, but with the firm grip of a handler moving a VIP out of a kill zone. We moved fast. I swept us out of her room and into the hallway. The Sig Sauer raised my eyes, checking every shadow, every corner of the ceiling. I burst into the master bedroom. Elena was already sitting up, disoriented, blinking against the sudden intrusion. I did not give her time to ask questions. I shoved them both into the walk-in closet of the master suite. This was not just a closet. It was a panic room disguised as luxury storage. The walls were reinforced with ballistic fiberglass, and the door was a solid core of oak over a sheet of steel. "Stay here," I commanded. Do not open this door, unless you hear my voice in the code word. The code is Jericho. Do you understand?" Elena looked at the gun in my hand, then at Maya's pale face, and the sleep vanished from her eyes. She nodded. I slammed the door shut and threw the heavy deadbolt. Then, I engaged the secondary lock, a titanium bar that slid into the frame with a heavy mechanical thunk. They were safe. Even if the house burned down, that room would stand for another hour. Now I was alone. I went straight to my study. I needed to see the skeleton of this beast I lived in. I pulled the physical blueprints from the flat file cabinet. I did not trust the digital files anymore. If he was in the walls, he could be in the server too. I spread the large sheets of vellum onto the desk, smoothing them out with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the layout of the second floor, tracing the lines of the HVAC system. I knew this house. I knew every nail, every weld, every wire, or at least I thought I did. I traced the ductwork running behind Maya's closet. It was a main trunk line 18 inches wide, carrying conditioned air from the basement unit. But as I looked at the cross-section between the second-floor joists and the dropped ceiling of the hallway, I saw it. It was a void. Architects call it dead space. It happens when structural beams intersect with utility runs, creating pockets of air that serve no purpose. Usually we seal them off. On the plans right where the voice had come from, there was a vertical shaft intended for a plumbing stack that we had scrapped halfway through construction 5 years ago. I remembered telling the contractor to cap it at the roof in the basement. But looking at the drawings now, I realized the dimensions were wrong. The shaft was not just a pipe chase. It was 3 feet wide, and it connected to the horizontal crawl space that ran above the entire second floor, a space I had designed for easy maintenance access, but had locked behind a keypad-secured hatch in the attic. If someone had uncapped that shaft, they would have a private elevator running from the basement to the attic, with access to every room in the house, via the space between the walls. I grabbed my tool bag from the closet. Inside was a rigid endoscope, a construction camera, on a long, flexible fiber optic cable. I ran back upstairs. I did not go to the attic. I went to the hallway wall outside Maya's room, the exact spot where the voice had whispered to me. I took a cordless drill and fitted a half-inch bit. The sound of the drill biting into the drywall was deafening in the silence, a harsh, mechanical scream. White dust sprayed onto the floor. I punched through. I swapped the drill for the endoscope, feeding the black snake-like cable into the hole. I held the handheld monitor up. The screen flickered, static, dancing in gray and white before the image stabilized. The camera's LED light illuminated a narrow, dusty world. I expected to see insulation. I expected to see wooden studs and darkness. Instead, I saw a wrapper. It was a candy bar wrapper, bright orange, reflecting the LED light. It was crumpled and sitting on top of a horizontal crossbeam. I pushed the camera deeper. The cable snaked around a conduit pipe. On the screen, something else came into view. A bottle. A plastic water bottle half empty, filled with a yellowish liquid. Urine. My stomach turned. This was not just an intruder. This was an infestation. I pulled the camera out and threw it on the floor. I did not need to see anymore. I needed to get in. I grabbed a sledgehammer from the emergency fire station in the hallway. I did not care about the Italian plaster or the custom finish. I swung the hammer with all the rage of a man whose sanctuary had been violated. Crash! The drywall exploded. The dust billowed out like smoke. I swung again and again. I tore a hole large enough for a man to fit through. I shone my tactical flashlight into the darkness and climbed inside the walls of my own home. The smell hit me first. It was a thick, cloying stench of unwashed human body stale sweat and rotting food mixed with the dry, chalky smell of gypsum. I was standing on the support beams of the second floor, in the crawl space I had sealed off 5 years ago. I crawled forward, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The space opened up where the roofline pitched higher. And there, nestled between the trusses, was the nest. It was repulsive in its domesticity. A dirty mattress, stained and gray, had been dragged up here likely, piece by piece, or stolen from the basement storage before I locked it. Piles of canned food, my canned food taken from the pantry, were stacked in a pyramid. There were clothes, dark tactical gear, hanging from nails driven into the wooden framing. But it was the walls that made me stop breathing. The intruder had turned the plywood sheathing of the attic into a gallery. Dozens of Polaroid photographs were taped to the wood. I moved closer, my boots crunching on empty tuna cans. I shone the light on the photos. My heart stopped. They were not taken from the bushes outside. They were taken from above. There was a photo of me and Elena sleeping in our bed. The angle was directly overhead, looking down through the air conditioning vent. In the photo, my mouth was slightly open, my arm thrown carelessly over the duvet. Elena was curled against me. We looked pathetic, defenseless. There were photos of Maya, dozens of them. Maya brushing her teeth. Maya reading in her beanbag chair. Maya changing her shirt, the image blurry but unmistakable. Next to the photos, he had written notes in red marker, directly on the wood. The handwriting was jagged aggressive. 10 p.m., lights out. Reliable. Tuesday. She forgets to lock the side latch. Easy access. Friday. He drinks 2 scotches, sleep heavy. He had not just been watching us. He had been studying us. He had quantified our lives, broken our routines down into data points of vulnerability. He knew my schedule better than I did. He knew when I was weak. I turned away, bile rising in my throat, and my light caught something else. A system of clear plastic tubes ran along the floor, branching out like veins. I followed one. It ended at a funnel taped over a small hole, drilled through the floorboard. I put my ear to the funnel. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs. He had built a primitive analog listening system. No microphones to hack, no batteries to die, just acoustics. He could lie here on this filth-crusted mattress and listen to the heartbeat of my house. He could hear our conversations, our arguments, our breathing. On a makeshift table made of plywood scraps, I found a notebook. It was a heavy engineering field journal. I opened it. It was filled with drawings. My drawings. He had somehow copied the floor plans of the house, but they were covered in red ink. Where I had drawn a solid wall, he had drawn a door. Where I had drawn a load-bearing column, he had drawn a jagged line with the word weakness scribbled next to it. He was redesigning the house. He had drawn new wiring diagrams, rerouting power to circuits I did not recognize. He had sketched out bypasses for the alarm sensors. This was not the work of a squatter. This was the work of an engineer, a dark mirror of myself. He was not just living in the house. He was surgically altering it, turning my safety features into traps. I flipped to the last page of the notebook. There was no drawing there, just a single object taped to the paper. I leaned in closer. It was a plastic ID badge. The edges were melted, curled black from intense heat. The laminate was bubbled and blistered, but the center was still legible. It was an employee badge from Aegis Dynamics. The logo was a stylized shield, the same one I had worn on my chest for 10 years. I recognized the color coding, blue clearance meaning technical specialist. I looked at the photo. The face was distorted by the heat damage, the eyes melted into white voids, but I knew the jawline. I knew the arrogant tilt of the chin. And I read the name printed underneath. Silas Vance. The flashlight slipped in my sweaty grip. The shadows in the crawlspace seemed to lurch toward me. Silas Vance was dead. I saw him die. 7 years ago, Beirut, the safe house collapse, the fire. I had read the casualty report myself. I had signed off on the insurance payout to his next of kin, though he had none. But the badge was here. And the breathing. I had heard the wet, rattling wheeze that was the sound of lungs that had inhaled smoke and fire. He was not a ghost. He was something worse. He was a mistake I thought I had buried. I looked around the nest again, seeing it with new eyes. This was not madness. This was methodology. The meticulous notes, the patience, the exploitation of structural flaws. It was all Silas. He was the best infiltration specialist I had ever worked with. I built the walls. He found the cracks. We were a team, until I left him behind. A noise came from the far end of the crawl space, near the ventilation shaft that led down to the basement. A soft scrape, boot leather on wood. I spun around, raising the Sig Sauer. The beam of my light cut through the dust, illuminating the dark tunnel of trusses and insulation. "Silas!" I roared, my voice echoing in the confined space. "I know you were here!" Silence answered me. But it was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, waiting silence. Then from the darkness, a small object rolled into the light. It stopped at my feet. It was a Polaroid. I did not want to look, but I could not look away. It was a photo of the master bedroom door, the panic room door, but the photo was fresh. The chemical smell of the developing fluid was still sharp in the air, and on the white border in fresh, wet red ink was a single timestamp. 3:45 a.m. I looked at my watch. It was 3:46. He had taken this photo 1 minute ago. While I was crawling in here to find him, he had climbed down. He was not in the walls anymore. He was outside the panic room. I scrambled backward, tearing my shirt on a protruding nail, ignoring the pain. I threw myself toward the hole I had smashed in the hallway wall. I had left Elena and Maya locked in a box, thinking it was the safest place in the world. But if Silas had been modifying the house, if he had been rewriting the blueprints, then the panic room was not a fortress. It was a cage. And I had just locked my family inside with the only man who knew how to open it. We drove for 3 hours before I felt the tension in my chest loosen even slightly. I did not take the highway. I took back roads, weaving through the dark timberlands of Oregon, constantly checking the rearview mirror for headlights that lingered too long. There were none. At least, none that I could see. But I knew better than to trust my eyes. My eyes had told me my house was empty, while a man lived inside my walls. We checked into the Fairmount Hotel in downtown Portland, under the name Davison. It was a corner suite on the 15th floor, chosen specifically for its sightlines and limited access points. I paid in cash. I hired a private security detail, 2 ex-military contractors I knew from the old days to stand guard outside the door. They were expensive, costing me $2,000 a day, but I would have paid 10 times that amount without blinking. Elena and Maya were asleep in the bedroom, exhausted by the terror and the sudden flight. I sat in the living area, the glow of the city lights bleeding through the sheer curtains. On the glass coffee table in front of me lay the object that had shattered my life. The melted ID badge. I picked it up. The plastic was warped, the edges curled like a dead leaf, but the name was still legible. Silas Vance. I closed my eyes, and the luxury hotel room vanished. The smell of lavender air freshener was replaced by the acrid stench of burning diesel and cordite. The silence of the suite was replaced by the deafening roar of a shaped charge detonating. It was 7 years ago, Beirut. We were working on a project codenamed Cedar 4. It was a safe house designed for a high-value asset, a defector from Syrian intelligence who carried a hard drive full of names. My job was to build the box. Silas's job was to break into it. He was the best penetration tester Aegis Dynamics had on the payroll. He was arrogant, brilliant, and utterly fearless. He used to joke that walls were just suggestions and locks were just polite requests. We were in the final phase of testing. The asset was not there yet, just the team. Silas was inside the secure zone, testing the biometric scanners in the server room. I was in the command center half a mile away, monitoring the feeds. Then the world exploded. A car bomb detonated at the perimeter wall. It was a diversion. A second team breached the rear entrance. Gunfire erupted on the comms. I watched the monitors as black-clad figures swarmed the courtyard. They were not there for the asset. They were there for the data the asset was bringing, or perhaps just to destroy the infrastructure before it could be used. Breach in Sector 4, Silas's voice crackled over the radio. He sounded calm, almost bored. I am sealing the server room. I need extraction, Chris. They are cutting through the north door. I looked at the tactical map. The hostiles were moving fast. They were carrying incendiary devices. They intended to burn the structure to the ground. Hold position, Silas, I said. Extraction team is 2 minutes out. I do not have 2 minutes, Silas replied. The sound of automatic gunfire hammered in the background. They are breaching. Chris, get me out of here. Then the protocol alert flashed on my screen. Code black. Data compromise imminent. The safe house had a failsafe. In the event of a catastrophic breach, the facility was designed to go into total lockdown. Heavy blast doors would slam shut, sealing every sector to prevent the fire and the intruders from reaching the central data core. But sealing the core meant sealing the server room. It meant sealing Silas inside. Chris, Silas yelled, they are throwing thermite. Open the damn door. I looked at the screen. If I opened the door to let him out, the hostile team would gain access to the secure network tunnel. The identities of 100 field agents would be exposed. It was a calculation. A cold, hard math problem. 1 life versus hundreds. My finger hovered over the enter key. I could hear his breathing on the comms, heavy and panicked. Chris, do not do it, he pleaded. Do not lock me in here. I did it. I hit the sequence. Lockdown initiated. On the monitor, I watched the heavy steel blast door slam shut, sealing the server room. I saw Silas run to the camera, his face pressed against the lens, his mouth screaming words I could not hear. Then the feed cut to static as the thermite grenades went off in the corridor. The fire suppression system failed. The sector burned. The official report stated that Silas Vance died instantly from smoke inhalation. A tragedy, collateral damage. I attended his memorial service. I looked at the empty casket. I drank the whiskey. And then, I buried the memory, convincing myself I had done the only thing I could do. I opened my eyes. I was back in the hotel room. My hands were shaking. I was not a hero. I was a man who had sacrificed a friend to protect a server. And now the dead man had come back to return the favor. I opened my laptop. It was a tough book, military grade, with no wireless card, only a hardline Ethernet port. I connected it to the hotel's data port, but routed the connection through 3 different proxy servers in Estonia, Singapore, and Brazil. I did not use Google. I used a custom browser designed to navigate the deep currents of the internet, the places where search engines do not go. I navigated to a dark forum, a digital watering hole for mercenaries, information brokers, and ghosts. I typed a specific sequence of numbers into the message board. It was an old code one that only a few people would recognize. 10 minutes later, a chat window popped up. The user ID was just a single letter. B. Baron. Baron was a broker of secrets. He used to work for the CIA before he realized there was more money in selling information than collecting it for the government. He knew everyone, and he knew where all the bodies were buried. The architect Baron typed, "It has been a long time. I heard you retired to the woods to play lumberjack. I need information," I typed back. "Silas Vance, Aegis Dynamics, Beirut incident, 7 years ago." The cursor blinked for a long time. I could almost feel Baron's hesitation across the digital void. "That is a ghost story," Baron finally replied. "Why are you digging up graves?" "Because the ghost is in my house," I wrote. There was a pause. Then Baron began to type fast. I wondered when he would surface. "The report was a lie, Chris. You know how the company works. No body, no crime. Silas did not die. The blast door you closed, it saved him from the bullets, but it trapped him in the oven. The thermite raised the temperature in that room to 400 degrees before the oxygen ran out. I felt sick. 400 degrees. He had baked alive." "How?" I typed. "He crawled into the subfloor cooling vents," Baron explained. "He survived, but barely. 60% of his body is scar tissue. His vocal cords were seared by the superheated air. That is why he does not talk much. He speaks through a stoma or he whispers. They call him the Ghost now." Because he looks like one. Where has he been? Hunting Baron wrote. He did not come back for money. He came back for his reputation. He blames you for the burn. But more than that, he blames your design. He has spent 7 years studying every safe house, every vault, every panic room you ever built. He breaks into them not to steal, but to leave a calling card, to prove they are flawed, to prove you are a fraud. I looked at the melted badge in my hand. It all made sense. The photos, the notes, the remodeling of my house. He did not just want to kill me if he wanted to kill me. He could have done it while I slept. He could have poisoned the water supply. No. He wanted to destroy my masterpiece. He wanted to show me that my fortress was a prison. He wanted to humiliate me before he ended me. He is dangerous, Chris Barron added. He is not the man you knew. His mind is as scarred as his skin. He is obsessed. He has no identity, no fingerprints, no face. He is just pain and logic. A notification chimed on my laptop. It was not from Barron. It was an email. It had bypassed my spam filters, bypassed the firewall I had set up. The sender address was a string of random alphanumeric characters. The subject line was blank. I hesitated. Opening an unknown email on a secure machine was a rookie mistake, but I knew who it was from. I clicked it. There was no text, just a video file. I clicked play. The video stream opened. It was grainy black and white, shot from a low angle. It showed a man sitting in a hotel room. He was sitting at a glass desk, staring at a laptop. He was wearing a gray t-shirt. There were sheer curtains behind him. I froze. I looked down at my own gray t-shirt. I looked at the sheer curtains. The man in the video was me. I spun around in my chair, scanning the room. The smoke detector, the sprinkler head, the television. Where was the camera? I looked back at the screen. The angle was coming from the television console. There was a tiny webcam embedded in the smart TV, a feature. I never used a feature I had forgotten to tape over because I was too busy worrying about physical threats. He was watching me right now. My heart hammered against my ribs. We had driven for hours. We had changed cars. We had used cash. How did he find us? Then I realized. He did not have to find us. He had been with us the whole time. I looked at the luggage pile near the door. Maya's backpack, Elena's suitcase, my duffel bag. I stood up and walked over to my bag. I ripped the zipper open. I dumped the contents onto the floor. Clothes toiletries, a spare magazine for my gun. And there, tucked into the lining of the bag, was a small black disc, no larger than a quarter. An AirTag, but not a consumer model. A military-grade tracker. He had planted it weeks ago, maybe months. He had been waiting for us to run. I looked back at the laptop. The video feed cut out. A black screen appeared. White text began to type itself out letter by letter, mimicking the way I had just typed to Barron. Hello, Chris. You look tired. I stared at the screen, my hands clenched into fists. You thought you could leave, the text continued. You thought a hotel would save you. But you do not understand. I do not want your house. The concrete is boring. The steel is cold. I want the architect. I want you to feel what I felt. The heat, the pressure, the hopelessness. You locked me in the fire. The cursor blinked a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. Now I will lock you in your own safety. A sudden high-pitched screech erupted from the laptop speakers. I slammed the lid shut, but the sound continued, piercing and sharp. Then the lights in the hotel room flickered. Click. Darkness. The power to the suite had been cut. But looking out the window, the city of Portland was still bright. The streetlights were on. The other buildings were lit. Only our room was dark. He was here. He was in the hotel system. I grabbed the Sig Sauer from the table. I moved to the bedroom door where Elena and Maya were sleeping. I had to wake them up. We had to move. Again. But as I reached for the handle, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It came from the hallway outside the main door. It was the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor. Then another. My security detail. 2 ex-Special Forces operators. Gone in seconds. Silence returned. Then a soft electronic beep. The sound of a keycard being swiped. The lock on the hotel room door disengaged with a mechanical click. The handle turned slowly. I raised the gun, aiming at the door. I was cornered. I was exposed. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt exactly what Silas must have felt in that server room. I was trapped in a box, and the monster was opening the door. "Get behind the bed," I shouted to Elena, my voice tearing through the silence. The door swung open, but the hallway was empty. There was no one standing there, just the 2 unconscious bodies of my guards dragged neatly to the side. And on the floor in the center of the doorway sat a small, simple object, a red metal canister, thermite. It was not lit, it was a message, a reminder. I can burn you any time I want, but not yet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, keeping the gun trained on the empty doorway. A text message. Run, Architect. The game has just started. We did not sleep. Sleep is a function of safety, and we had none left. The canister of thermite sitting on the hotel floor was a paperweight, holding down the reality of our situation. We had to move, again. I herded Elena and Maya toward the elevator, my eyes scanning every corner of the hallway, looking for cameras, for shadows, for anything that did not belong. I felt like a rat in a maze where the walls were constantly shifting. We reached the lobby, and I went straight to the front desk to check out. I pulled out my credit card, a black Amex with a limit high enough to buy a small island. The concierge, a young man with a polite smile, swiped it. He frowned. He swiped it again. "I am sorry, Mr. Davison," he said, using my alias. "The card has been declined." "Try it again," I said, my voice tight. "It is a system error." He tried. "It says, 'Refer to issuer, sir.' Do you have another card?" I pulled out my Visa. Declined. I pulled out my debit card from a separate bank account I kept for emergencies. Declined. I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking app. The screen flashed red. Account frozen. Suspicious activity reported. I checked the joint account. Frozen. I checked the offshore account in the Caymans. Inaccessible. Silas was not just hunting me physically. He was starving me out. He had flagged every asset I owned as fraudulent or laundered. In the span of an hour, he had turned me from a millionaire architect into a pauper. "Christopher," Elena's voice was brittle. She was holding her phone, her face pale. "My boss just called." I looked at her. "Ignore it. We need to go." "I cannot ignore it," she whispered. "He fired me. Effective immediately." "Why?" He said I sent emails." She stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "To the entire client list. Racist slurs, confidential project leaks, pornographic images. He said they came from my corporate account 2 hours ago." My stomach dropped. Silas had hacked her credentials. He was scorching the earth. He was not just killing us. He was destroying our names, our reputations, our ability to function in society. He was ensuring that even if we survived, we would have nothing to go back to. Then, Maya gasped. It was a sound of pure teenage devastation. She dropped her phone on the marble floor. "No," she sobbed. "No, please." I picked up her phone. Her social media feed was open. It was a deluge of comments, shares, and ridicule. Someone had posted her medical records. Her therapy sessions from last year dealing with anxiety. Her gynecological exam results. Everything private, everything sensitive was now public domain, trending on local forums. "They are laughing at me," she cried, burying her face in her hands. I looked at the phone, rage blinding me for a second. This was social death. Silas was systematically stripping away our layers of protection. Financial, professional, personal. He wanted us naked, shamed, and destitute before he moved in for the kill. "Get in the car," I ordered, my voice low and dangerous. "Now." We had the rental car and the cash in my pocket. About $400. That was it. I drove them to a motel on the outskirts of the city, a place with cash rates, and no questions asked. I put them in a room with a deadbolt and told them to keep the curtains drawn and the lights off. "Where are you going?" Elena asked, gripping my arm. "I have to go back," I said. "I have to find out how he is doing this." "He will kill you," she said. "If I stay here, he destroys us anyway," I replied. "He is winning because he knows the board. I need to see the pieces." I drove back to the house in the daylight. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows through the pine trees. The house looked majestic, a concrete sculpture rising from the forest floor. But now I saw it for what it was, a tomb. I parked the car a mile away and hiked in, approaching from the rear perimeter. I did not go inside. I knew he was watching the interior. I needed to know how he got in without triggering the sensors. I walked the fence line. The infrared beams were active. I checked the junction box where the main power line entered the property. The lock was intact. But something caught my eye near the base of the concrete footing. The dirt was different. The soil in this part of Oregon is dark, rich with pine needles and loam. But there was a patch of clay-colored earth near the conduit pipe that looked fresher, lighter, as if it had been dug up and packed back down recently. I found a shovel in the tool shed and started digging. 2 feet down, I hit the conduit. It was a thick PVC pipe carrying the main electrical feed. But there was a splice, a bypass. A secondary cable had been grafted onto the main line, running parallel to it but diverting into a separate buried box that was not on my blueprints. I opened the box. Inside was a piece of hardware that made my blood boil. It was a loopback device, a signal spoofer. It was wired directly into the alarm panel's power supply. It allowed someone to freeze the sensor status. To the system, everything looked secure. But in reality, the intruder could open a window, walk in, and close it, and the system would never register the break in the circuit. This was not something Silas could have done alone. This required digging wiring and high-voltage work. It required hours of labor. Someone had helped him. I looked at the workmanship. The crimps on the wires were neat. The electrical tape was color-coded. This was a professional job. I thought back to the maintenance log. Who had worked on the house recently? 6 months ago, we had a surge protector failure. I had hired a local subcontractor to replace the main breaker panel. I pulled out my phone. I still had the invoice in my email archive. Mark Higgins, licensed electrician. I remembered him. A nervous guy, shaky hands, always checking his phone. I had thought it was just anxiety. Now I knew better. I did not call him. I drove to his address listed on the invoice. It was a rundown duplex in the industrial district, peeling paint, and a yard full of rusted car parts. I banged on the door. No answer. I kicked it open. The place smelled of stale beer and desperation. I found Mark in the garage, hunched over a workbench, stripping copper wire from a stolen spool. He jumped when he saw me dropping his wire cutters. "Mr. Miller?" he stammered, his eyes darting to the door. "What are you doing here?" I did not speak. I crossed the garage in 2 strides, grabbed him by the collar of his grease-stained shirt, and slammed him against the wall. A shelf of tools rattled and fell. "How much?" I snarled. "I do not know what you are talking about," he squealed. I pressed my forearm against his windpipe. "The bypass on the main line. The signal spoofer. You installed it. How much did he pay you?" "I can't," he wheezed. "He said he would kill me." "He is not here," I said, leaning in close. "I am, and I am very motivated, Mark." I tightened the pressure. Mark's face turned red. He tapped my arm frantically. I eased off, just enough to let him breathe. 50,000, Mark gasped, coughing. "He paid off my gambling debts. I owed money to the wrong people. He knew everything." "Who is he?" "I never saw his face," Mark said, trembling. "He wore a mask, a ballistic face mask. He met me at the bar. He had the schematics. He told me exactly where to dig. He told me exactly what wire to cut. "What else did you do?" I demanded. "Nothing. I just put in the switch." "Liar!" I shouted, slamming him again. "He has been in that house for weeks. He needed supplies. He needed food. Did you bring them?" Mark began to cry. "I made deliveries. At night. He gave me a list." "What was on the list?" "Food, water batteries," Mark sobbed, "and construction materials." I froze. "What kind of materials?" Mark wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Heavy stuff. Reinforced steel rebar, magnetic locking mechanisms, the kind used in prisons, and 20 bags of quick-dry industrial cement." My grip on his shirt loosened. I stepped back, my mind reeling. Reinforced steel, prison locks, cement. Silas was not just living in the walls, he was fortifying them. He was not trying to break in. He was sealing the exits. He was retrofitting my home into a cage. He intended to lock us inside and seal the doors permanently. The safe house was going to be our mausoleum. "He is crazy," Mark whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "He made me order soundproofing foam too. Acoustic dampeners. He said he did not want the neighbors to hear the screaming." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "When was the last time you spoke to him?" I asked. "Yesterday," Mark said. "He called to say the job was done. He said my debt was paid." Just then, a phone rang. It was not mine. It was Mark's. It was sitting on the workbench, a cheap burner phone plugged into a wall charger. Mark stared at it as if it were a rattlesnake. "Do not answer it," I commanded. Mark reached for it anyway, his hand shaking uncontrollably. "I have to. If I don't answer, he gets angry." "Mark, no!" Mark grabbed the phone. He pressed the answer button and held it to his ear. "Hello," he whispered. I watched Mark's face. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened in a silent scream. I saw the battery casing on the back of the phone bulge. It happened in a fraction of a second, but to my eyes, it was slow motion. The lithium-ion battery, overcharged and triggered by a remote signal code, went into thermal runaway. "Drop it!" I yelled, diving behind an engine block sitting on the floor. The explosion was small, but violent. It sounded like a gunshot. Mark was thrown backward. He hit the ground hard, screaming, clutching his face. Smoke curled up from his head. I scrambled up, my ears ringing. The workbench was on fire. I ran to Mark. He was alive, but the side of his face was a ruin of burns and shrapnel. The phone was gone, disintegrated. I looked at the burning debris. Silas had been listening. He knew I was here. He knew Mark had talked. And he had tied up the loose end with a single phone call. I dragged Mark out of the garage and onto the driveway away from the flames. He was moaning unconscious. I checked his pulse, weak, but there. I called 911 on my own phone. "Explosion at 442 Industrial Way," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "1 casualty. Severe burns." I hung up. I could not stay. The police would ask questions I could not answer. I looked back at the smoke rising from the garage. This was not a game of cat and mouse. This was war. Silas had weaponized the technology we used every day. Phones, banks, emails, houses. I got back into my car. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a cold, hard realization. Silas wanted me to suffer. He wanted me to watch my life burn down around me piece by piece, just like the safe house in Beirut. He wanted me to return to the house. He was inviting me back. He had prepared the cell. He had poured the cement. He had set the trap. And I had no choice. I had to walk into it. Because if I ran, he would just keep detonating parts of my life until there was nothing left but ash. I put the car in gear. I was not going back to the motel. I was going to finish this. I drove to a small private airfield 40 miles outside of Portland. It was a location that did not exist on Google Maps, a relic of the Cold War repurposed for black budget operations. I had not spoken to Agent Graves in a decade, not since I left life, but debts in our world do not expire. I pulled up to the hangar where a Gulfstream jet was waiting its engines, already whining with a high-pitched idle. Graves was standing by the stairs. He looked older, grayer, but he stood with the same rigid posture. I got out of the car and opened the back door for Elena and Maya. "Where are we going?" Maya asked, her voice small and brittle. "Somewhere he cannot find you," I said. "Somewhere with no cell service, no internet, and walls that are 3 feet thick." I hugged them both. It felt like a final goodbye, though I refused to say the words. Elena gripped my hand, her fingernails digging into my palm. She knew. She knew I was not going into witness protection with them. She knew I was going back to the house. "Come back to us," she whispered. "I will," I lied. Or maybe it was a promise. I did not know yet. I watched the plane taxi down the runway and lift into the gray sky. As soon as the landing gear retracted, a weight lifted off my shoulders. My weakness was gone. My vulnerabilities were airborne and heading toward a bunker in Nevada. Now I was just a man with a gun and a very specific set of skills. I turned the rental car around and drove back to the house. It was dusk when I arrived. The house sat in the clearing, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. It looked serene, majestic. But I knew better. It was a biological organism now infected by a parasite. I parked the car in the driveway, right in the open. I wanted him to know I was back. I walked to the front door. The lock was my design, a biometric scanner coupled with a physical key. I inserted the key and scanned my thumb. The bolts retracted with a heavy clank. I stepped inside. The air in the house was stale. It smelled of ozone and heated electronics. I walked into the living room, the vast open space dominated by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out into the forest. I stood in the center of the room and waited. "I am home," I said aloud. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the silence was broken by a sound that made my skin crawl. It was the digital chime of a smart speaker starting up. I had never installed smart speakers. I hated them. I refused to have microphones in my house connected to the cloud. But there, sitting on the mantel of the fireplace, was a black cylinder, and another on the bookshelf, and another on the kitchen island. Silas had installed them. While he was living in my walls, he had wired my analog sanctuary for sound. "Welcome home, Christopher," a voice said. It was not a human voice. It was synthetic, a text-to-speech program that sounded flat and emotionless. It was the voice of a ghost who had lost his own throat. "I see you sent the family away," the voice continued. "Wise, but lonely." I did not respond. I kept my eyes moving, scanning for the cameras I knew were hidden in the smoke detectors and the light fixtures. "Do you want to play a game?" the voice asked. Suddenly, the 60-inch television mounted on the wall flickered to life. I had disconnected it before I left, but he had rewired it. The screen turned bright blue, then displayed a detailed 3-dimensional schematic of my house. It was a master control view. "I have spent 7 years improving your design," the synthetic voice droned. "You built a shell. I gave it a nervous system." On the screen, the windows of the house were outlined in green. Then, one by one, they turned red. I heard the mechanical thud, thud, thud of the magnetic locks engaging throughout the house. "Perimeter sealed," the voice announced. "Front door, sealed." The schematic zoomed in on the front door. The icon turned red. I heard the deadbolt slide home behind me, followed by the grinding noise of a secondary locking mechanism I had never installed. "You are locked in, Christopher," the voice mocked. "The air supply is controlled by me. The power is controlled by me. The water is controlled by me. You are the rat. I am the scientist." I stood perfectly still. He was trying to intimidate me. He was showing off his dominance over the digital domain. He thought this was a chess match where he controlled the board, but he forgot who built the table. "You think you can keep me here?" I asked, looking directly at the camera lens on the TV. "I do not think," the voice replied. "I calculate. You have 0% chance of exit without my permission. I want to see if the great architect can escape his own creation. You have 24 hours before I vent the oxygen and replace it with nitrogen. Tick-tock." A countdown timer appeared on the screen. 23 hours, 59 minutes. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I pushed it down. This was psychological warfare. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to run from door to window, banging on the glass, screaming for help. He wanted the satisfaction of watching the man who buried him bury himself. I decided to give him a show. I let out a roar of frustration. I grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You bastard!" I screamed, looking wildly around the room. "Open the door!" I ran to the nearest window and pounded on the glass. It was triple-paned, bullet-resistant laminate. It did not budge. "Open it!" I yelled, grabbing a heavy steel chair from the dining table. I swung it with all my might against the window frame. Clang. The metal vibrated, but the window held. I swung again, screaming incoherent curses. I was acting like a trapped animal. I threw the chair across the room. It crashed into the kitchen island. "Pathetic," the voice from the speaker sneered. "Is this the man who designed the black site in Nevada? You are breaking furniture like a child." I ignored the voice. I picked up a bottle of whiskey from the bar cart and threw it at the television. The screen cracked, the image distorting, but the voice continued to laugh. "You cannot break the code with a bottle, Chris." I fell to my knees, panting, my head in my hands. To the cameras, I looked like a broken man. I looked defeated. But behind my hands, my eyes were dry and calculating. Every time I smashed something, I was not just venting rage. I was testing the acoustics, I was creating noise, and more importantly, I was creating debris. I stood up, swaying slightly, feigning exhaustion. I stumbled toward the kitchen. "I need a drink," I muttered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. I went to the pantry. This was the only room in the house with no windows. I knew there was a camera in the corner, a small fisheye lens embedded in the motion sensor. I grabbed a broom and swung it at the shelf, knocking down cans of soup and bags of flour. A cloud of white dust exploded into the air. "Damn it!" I yelled, coughing. The flour coated the lens of the camera. The image on Silas's screen would be white out. He would still hear me, but he could not see me. "Cleaning up on aisle 4, the voice mocked. I fell to the floor, hidden by the cloud of flour and the angle of the island. I reached into my boot and pulled out a small, high-torque screwdriver and a pair of wire snips. I did not clean up the flour. I crawled to the baseboard behind the heavy commercial refrigerator. I knew the wiring schematics because I drew them. The power line for the kitchen camera ran through this junction box. But I did not cut the power. If I cut the power, he would know I was tampering. Instead, I opened the faceplate and found the data cable. I stripped the insulation and twisted the copper pair together, creating a short loop. On Silas's screen, the camera would not go black. It would freeze on the last image it saw, the white cloud of flour. He would think the lens was just dirty. He would not know the feed was dead. I had created a blind spot. I moved quickly. I crawled to the utility closet inside the pantry. I pulled out my own tools that I had stashed there years ago, a heavy-duty impact drill and a diamond-tipped hole saw. I waited for the voice to speak again. 19 hours left, Chris. Are you thirsty?" I started screaming again. "Shut up, shut up!" I banged a pot against the floor, creating a deafening metallic racket. Under the cover of the noise, I pressed the drill against the concrete floor. I was not trying to drill out, I was drilling into the subfloor channel where the fiber optic cables ran. I drilled for 10 seconds, then stopped when I stopped screaming. I repeated this process for 10 minutes. Scream, bang, drill. Scream, bang, drill. Finally, the bit punched through. I fished out the main data trunk line. This was the hard line that Silas was using to control the smart home features. I could cut it, but that would alert him. I needed to do something smarter. I needed to lure him out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a burner phone I had bought at a gas station on the way here. It was a cheap flip phone, untraceable. I dialed a number from memory. "Baron," I whispered. "You are alive," Baron's voice came through tinny and distant. "And you are in the house. I can see the signal activity spiking." "Listen to me," I said, keeping my voice low, covered by the hum of the refrigerator. "I need you to do something. I need you to list the house." "What?" "List the house for sale," I said. "On the dark web real estate forums, on the luxury broker sites, everywhere. Right now." "You are insane," Baron said. "You are trapped inside." "Make the listing say that Christopher Miller is liquidating assets to flee the country to avoid prosecution," I instructed. "Price it at $1 million. Cash only, immediate possession, title transfer within the hour." "$1 million," Baron scoffed. "That place is worth 10. That is a fire sale." "Exactly," I said. "It is an insult. It means I do not care about the house. It means I am abandoning it. It means I am letting strangers have it." "Why?" "Because he is watching," I said. "Silas is watching the data streams. He is obsessed with this house. It is his white whale. If he sees me selling it to some random cartel boss or a tech billionaire for pennies, it will drive him mad. He cannot let someone else own his victory." "You are baiting a trap with a house you cannot leave," Baron said. "Just do it. And send the buyer contract to the email address associated with the house server. Silas will see it." "Done," Baron said. "Good luck, architect." I hung up and crushed the phone, tossing the pieces into the trash. I crawled back out of the pantry, making sure to stagger as if I were drunk. I grabbed another bottle of water and sat on the floor in the living room, right in the center of the camera's view. I waited. 10 minutes later, the music started. It was discordant, screeching electronic noise blasting from the speakers. He was trying to break my sleep deprivation tolerance. I covered my ears and rocked back and forth, playing the part. But in my mind, I was counting. Silas was somewhere nearby. He had to be within signal range to control the localized jammer he used on my cell phone earlier. He was likely in a mobile command unit in the woods, or maybe in the old hunting cabin down the ridge. He would see the listing. He would see the notification that a bid had been placed. Baron was good. He would fabricate a buyer within minutes. Silas Vance had spent 7 years planning this revenge. He wanted to kill me, yes. But more than that, he wanted to become the master of this space. He wanted to prove his superiority. If I sold the house, I was taking away his trophy. I was telling him that his grand prize was meaningless to me. The music stopped abruptly. The screen on the TV shifted. The countdown timer disappeared. A text box appeared. Transaction detected. Sale pending. The synthetic voice returned, but this time the cadence was different. It was faster. Angrier. "You cannot sell what is not yours, Chris." I looked up at the camera, my face sweaty and pale, but I allowed a small, desperate smile to touch my lips. "I just did," I shouted. "I signed the digital deed. The buyer is on his way. He has a demolition crew coming tomorrow. He wants to tear it down and build a condo." It was a lie. A massive, provocative lie. But to an obsessive narcissist like Silas, it was a declaration of war on his religion. "No," the voice growled. The synthesized tone cracked, revealing the human rage underneath the algorithm. "You lose, Silas," I taunted. "You get nothing, just a pile of rubble." The lights in the house flashed red. The locking mechanisms ground loudly. "Transaction canceled," the voice hissed. "You cannot cancel it," I yelled. "It is on the blockchain! It is done!" There was a long silence. Then the TV screen went black. The red lights turned off, plunging the house into darkness. The front door lock clicked. It did not open, but the secondary deadbolt, the one Silas had installed and controlled, retracted. He was unlocking the perimeter, not to let me out, but to let himself in. He could not let the demolition crew take his prize. He had to claim it physically. He had to stop the sale. He had to kill the seller and destroy the contract. I stood up in the darkness. My act was over. I dropped the empty water bottle. I reached behind the sofa cushion where I had taped the Sig Sauer P320 earlier. I checked the magazine. 17 rounds. The game had changed. He was no longer the ghost in the machine. He was coming through the front door. And when he stepped across that threshold, he would find that the architect had one final renovation planned for him. The notification on my iPad pinged with a cheerful generic chime that sounded absurdly bright given the context. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the debris of my stage breakdown, and stared at the screen. Barron had done exactly what I asked. The listing had gone live on the private encrypted servers used by high-net-worth individuals who preferred their transactions to remain invisible to tax authorities. The bait had been in the water for less than 12 minutes. An offer had come in. It was a cash offer, 20% above the asking price, with a stipulation for immediate vacancy and possession within the hour. The buyer was listed as Obsidian Shell Corporation, a holding company registered in the Seychelles. It was a shell company. I knew it, and the man watching me through the cameras knew that I knew it. Silas was not even trying to be subtle. He was buying his victory. He was paying $2 million not for the concrete and glass, but for the satisfaction of evicting me from my own life. I looked up at the camera lens hidden in the motion sensor in the corner of the ceiling. I made sure my face looked defeated. I let my shoulders slump. I wiped a fake tear from my cheek. "Fine," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough for the microphones to pick it up. "You win. Take it. Just let me go." I tapped the screen, executing the digital signature. The house was sold. Legally, it now belonged to a ghost. I stood up and began the performance of a lifetime. I grabbed a duffel bag and started throwing clothes into it, haphazardly. I grabbed a framed photo of Maya from the mantelpiece, looked at it with longing, and shoved it into the bag. I moved with the frantic, jerky energy of a man who is terrified that the deal might fall through or that the monster might change his mind. I wanted Silas to see panic. I wanted him to see a rat fleeing a sinking ship. I walked to the front door. The heavy locking mechanism which had been holding me prisoner clicked open. The red light on the panel turned green. He was letting me out. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun had set and the forest was a wall of blue-black shadows. I turned back one last time, looking into the foyer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the physical master key, a heavy, laser-cut piece of titanium. I dropped it onto the welcome mat and kicked it underneath with the toe of my boot. "It is all yours," I muttered. I walked to my rental car, threw the bag in the passenger seat, and started the engine. I did not look back as I drove down the long, winding driveway. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, waiting for a roadblock or an ambush. But the road was clear. Silas wanted me gone. He did not want a confrontation. He wanted displacement. He wanted to occupy my space. I drove for exactly 5 miles. I reached a turnout near the old logging road that cut through the state forest. I pulled the car deep into the brush, covering it with a tarp I had bought along with the burner phone. I stripped off my jacket and put on a dark, tight-fitting thermal shirt. I blackened my face with grease from the wheel well. Then I started walking back. I did not take the road. The road was watched. I took the game trails, moving through the undergrowth with the silence I had learned 2 decades ago. The woods were alive with the sounds of crickets and nightbirds, but my mind was focused on the geometry of the ground beneath my feet. I was not heading for the front door. I was heading for a mistake I had made 6 years ago, or rather a mistake I had turned into a secret. When I designed the house, the county required a specific grade for water runoff. I had argued that the natural water table was too high, but the inspectors insisted. So, I built a storm drain system. It was a massive concrete culvert, 4 feet in diameter, running from the base of the foundation out to the creek bed a mile away. However, I never filed the final schematic for the intake valve. On the blueprints, I submitted to the city, and the blueprints Silas had stolen. The drain ended at a grate in the garden. In reality, the pipe continued. It ran underneath the garden under the foundation and connected directly to the sub-basement sump pump room. It was an access point I had kept for catastrophic flooding scenarios. It was unmapped. It was invisible. I found the outlet near the creek. It was covered in overgrowth and vines. I pulled the rusted grate aside, the hinges screaming in protest, but the sound was swallowed by the rushing water of the stream. I climbed inside. The pipe was cold and smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. I crawled on my hands and knees, the concrete scraping against my palms. It was a long, dark tunnel, pitch black. I did not use a flashlight. I counted my crawls. 100 yards, 200 yards. The air grew stagnant. I was under the house now. I reached the end of the line, a vertical shaft with a steel ladder rungs set into the wall. I climbed up, pushing against the heavy manhole cover at the top. It lifted with a heavy grunt of effort. I emerged into the sub-basement. This was not the finished basement, where we had the home theater and the wine cellar. This was the mechanical heart of the house, located 20 feet below ground. It was a room of raw concrete, filled with the hum of the HVAC handlers, the hydraulic pumps for the water system, and the backup generator. And the server rack. The server rack was blinking with frantic activity. The hard drives were spinning, processing the data streams from the cameras, the microphones, and the smart locks. Silas was controlling everything from here remotely. I walked over to the main fiber optic interface. This was the umbilical cord connecting my house to the world. I did not cut it. If I cut it, the system would throw a tampering alarm. Instead, I pulled the main router plug and plugged it into a loopback simulator I kept in the tool chest. To Silas, it would look like the internet connection had just dropped, a common occurrence in the mountains. He would assume it was a service provider glitch. He would check the status, see the signal, trying to reconnect, and wait. It bought me time. It blinded him to the outside world, but it kept the internal network alive so I could see him. Next, I went to the hydraulic control panel. This panel controlled the pneumatic pressure for the heavy security doors. I flipped the switch from digital/remote to manual/local. A red light illuminated on the panel. Override engaged. The smart locks upstairs were now dumb locks. They would not open with a code. They would not open with a fingerprint. They would only open if the physical tumblers were turned, or if I released the pressure from down here. I walked over to the old analog monitor bank on the far wall. This was my failsafe. While the rest of the house ran on digital, IP cameras I had installed, 4 hardwired CCTV cameras on a closed circuit. They were powered by a separate battery array. They did not touch the internet. I flicked the monitor on. The grainy black and white images flickered to life. Camera 1 showed the front driveway. It was empty. I checked my watch. He would be here soon. He was arrogant, but he was punctual. He had bought the house. He had the key. He would want to walk in through the front door like a king returning to his castle. 10 minutes passed. The silence in the sub-basement was oppressive. I checked the Sig Sauer again, wiping a smudge of grease from the slide. Then headlights swept across the monitor. A vehicle pulled up the driveway. It was not a sports car. It was not a luxury sedan. It was a matte black cargo van, the kind used for deliveries or kidnappings. No license plates. The van stopped right in front of the main entrance. The engine cut off. The driver's door opened. A boot hit the pavement, then another. Silas Vance stepped out. I leaned closer to the monitor. The resolution was low, but I could see him clearly. He was wearing a dark trench coat over a tactical vest. He did not look like the man I remembered. The man I remembered stood tall with a cocky grin. This man moved with a stiff, jerky gait, as if his skin was too tight for his body. He was not wearing a mask. He looked up at the house. Even in the grainy footage, I could see the ruin of his face. The fire had taken his nose, leaving two dark slits. His lips were gone, replaced by a permanent lipless rictus of scar tissue that exposed his teeth. One of his eyes was sewn shut. The other was wide-staring, unblinking. He was a monster. A living, breathing nightmare born from the flames I had sealed him in. He walked to the passenger side of the van and slid the door open. He reached inside and pulled out a large, rolling suitcase. It was a Pelican case, hard-shelled heavy. He dragged it toward the front door. I knew what was in that case. It was not clothes. It was not toiletries. The way he handled it with a reverence and a heaviness told me everything. That case contained the tools of his trade, not the hacking tools. He was done with those. These were the tools for the flesh: scalpels, bone saws, chemical cauterizers. He had brought them for me. He had expected to catch me here. And even though he thought I was gone, he was bringing them inside. Perhaps to use on the furniture. Perhaps to fantasize. Or perhaps he knew with some twisted instinct that the game was not over. He reached the front mat. He bent down, stiffly, painfully, and retrieved the titanium key I had left. He stood up and inserted the key into the lock. I watched on the monitor as he turned it. The mechanism was manual now. He had to use force. I saw his shoulder dip as he shoved the heavy door open. He stepped into the foyer. He stood there for a moment looking around. He took a deep breath. I imagined the sound of it. That wet, rattling wheeze I had heard in the wall. He was breathing in the air of my home. He was claiming it. He dragged the case inside. The wheels bumped over the threshold. He turned and closed the door. I saw him lock it from the inside. He threw the deadbolt. He engaged the chain. He was locking himself in. I stood in the darkness of the sub-basement and let out a long, slow breath. He thought he was sealing the world out. He thought he was finally alone in his fortress. He was right. He was alone. But he was not the only one in the fortress. I reached for the main power breaker for the lighting grid. I gripped the heavy plastic handle. "Welcome home, Silas," I whispered. I yanked the handle down. On the monitor, the lights in the foyer went out. The house plunged into total darkness. Silas stopped moving. I saw his head snap up. He dropped the handle of the suitcase. He reached for his belt, pulling out a weapon equipped with a tactical light. The beam cut through the dark foyer, sweeping frantically back and forth. He knew. In that split second, he realized that the internet outage was not a glitch. He realized that the sale was a sham. He realized that the rabbit had not run away. The rabbit had gone underground. I holstered my gun and picked up a fire axe from the emergency wall mount. The time for computers was over. The time for psychology was over. I began the climb up the ladder from the sub-basement. I was coming up into the kitchen pantry. I was coming into the cage he had helped me build. And only one of us was going to walk back out. The darkness I had created by pulling the main breaker lasted exactly 10 seconds. I stood in the sub-basement, counting the heartbeats, hoping the silence would hold. But I had designed this house too well. I had built it to survive the apocalypse, which meant it had redundancies on top of redundancies. With a heavy mechanical shutter that vibrated through the concrete floor, the backup diesel generator in the external shed kicked to life. The lights on the monitor bank flickered and then stabilized. Upstairs, the foyer was bathed in light once again. I cursed under my breath. In my haste to cut the grid, I had forgotten to disable the automatic transfer switch. On the grainy, black and white monitor, I watched Silas Vance react. He did not panic. He did not scramble for cover. He simply stood there in the foyer, surrounded by his luggage, and looked up at the chandelier as it buzzed back to life. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a minor inconvenience. He knew the house. He knew the generator would catch him. He turned his attention back to the room. He began to move, but it was not the tactical sweep of a soldier clearing a room. It was something far more disturbing. He walked to the nearest wall, a slab of exposed architectural concrete, and ran his gloved hand over the rough surface. He leaned in, pressing his cheek against the cold stone, closing his eyes. It was a caress. He was greeting the structure like a lover. Then he reached up and unbuckled the straps of his tactical vest. He shrugged off the heavy trench coat, letting it fall to the floor. Underneath, he wore a simple gray t-shirt that clung to his gaunt frame. He reached for his face. He dug his fingers under the edge of his jawline and peeled away a layer of synthetic skin, a high-end prosthetic mask I had not realized he was wearing. I stared at the monitor, my stomach churning. The face underneath was a ruin. It was a landscape of melted wax and scar tissue. Where his nose should have been there were two dark vertical slits. His lips were gone, burned away 7 years ago, leaving his teeth permanently exposed in a skeletal grin. His left ear was a nub of fused flesh. His skin was a patchwork of pink and white keloids, shiny and tight. This was the face of the man I had left in the server room. This was the face of the fire. He dropped the mask onto the floor and kicked it away. He did not need it anymore. He was home. He walked over to the console table in the hallway, where Elena kept our family photos. He picked up a framed picture of the three of us, Elena, Maya, and me, taken last summer at the beach. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a sudden violent motion, he smashed it against the corner of the table. Glass sprayed across the floor. He did not stop there. He pulled a thick envelope from his pocket. He took out a stack of photographs and began placing them around the room, propping them up on the shelves, taping them to the mirrors. I zoomed in with the camera. They were not random images. They were crime scene photos, high-resolution prints of the Beirut safe house after the explosion, twisted steel beams, blackened walls, a body bag being zipped up. He was redecorating my home with his trauma. He was turning my sanctuary into a memorial for his own death. Silas returned to the large pelican case he had dragged inside. He undid the latches. I expected weapons. I expected the torture devices of a sadist. Instead, he pulled out a portable industrial welding unit and a stack of steel plates. He dragged the equipment to the living room window, the large, beautiful pane of glass that looked out over the forest. He placed a steel plate against the frame. He lowered a welding mask over his scarred face and ignited the torch. Bzzzt. The blue arc of the welder flared on the monitor, washing the room in a ghostly light. He was not trying to break in. He was sealing us in. He was welding steel plates over the windows. He intended to turn this house into a mausoleum, a windowless concrete box where no light could enter and no screams could escape. He wanted to be Pharaoh in his own pyramid. I watched him work for 5 minutes. His movements were precise, efficient. He was a master builder in his own right, unmaking my work with terrifying focus. Then he stopped. He turned off the torch and lifted the mask. He tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. He turned away from the window and walked toward the stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was heading up to the second floor. I switched the monitor view to camera 3, the upstairs hallway. I watched Silas crest the stairs. He walked past the master bedroom. He walked past the guest room. He stopped in front of Maya's door. "No," I whispered, my hand gripping the edge of the console. "Do not go in there." He pushed the door open. I switched to camera 4, Maya's bedroom. The room was exactly as she had left it. Posters of bands on the walls, a pile of clothes on the chair, her collection of vintage cameras on the shelf. It was a space of innocence. Silas stepped inside. He looked enormous in the room, a dark stain on a canvas of pastel colors. He walked to her desk. He picked up a hairbrush she had left there. He pulled a long strand of hair from the bristles and held it up to the light, inspecting it like a specimen. He let it drift to the floor. He moved to the bed. He sat down on the edge, the mattress sagging under his weight. He ran his hand over the duvet, tracing the pattern of the fabric. Then slowly, sickeningly, he lay down. He curled his scarred body into the fetal position, placing his head on her pillow. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. I felt a rage so pure, so white-hot that my vision blurred. I wanted to tear through the floorboards and rip his throat out with my teeth. He was defiling the one thing I had sworn to protect. He was inserting himself into the most private, sacred space in my world. Then he opened his eyes. He looked directly at the smoke detector on the ceiling, directly at the hidden lens of the digital camera he thought was still recording. He reached for a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. He pressed the button. His voice boomed through the house, amplified by the smart speakers he had hacked. It echoed down the ventilation shafts and reached me in the sub-basement. "I know you are watching, Chris," he rasped. The sound was wet, distorted, but the malice was crystal clear. "I know you did not sell the house. I know you are close. You are probably sitting in a hotel room glued to your laptop thinking you are clever." He sat up on the bed, picking up a teddy bear that Maya had kept since she was 5. He stroked its fur with his scarred thumb. "I have not disabled the cameras," he continued. "I want you to see this. I want you to see me in her bed. I want you to see me in your life." He paused, a terrible smile stretching his lipless mouth. "I will wait," he whispered. "I have plenty of food. I have plenty of oxygen. I will wait right here. Because I know she will come back. She forgot her bear. Children always come back for their things. And when she does, I will be the father she finds." He threw the bear across the room. It hit the wall with a soft thud. "Come and get me, architect. Or stay away and watch me become the head of the household." I was shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a man who has just decided to commit murder. He had crossed the line. He had brought my daughter into his theater of pain. Silas stood up and left the room. He went back downstairs. I switched the monitor back to the living room. He went to the Pelican case again. This time he pulled out a heavy-duty rotary hammer drill. He walked over to the main structural column in the center of the living room, a massive pillar of reinforced concrete that supported the roof and the second-floor cantilever. He pressed the drill against the concrete. The sound of the bit grinding into the stone vibrated through the floor joists. He drilled a deep hole. Then another. Then another. He reached into the case and pulled out a brick of gray putty wrapped in plastic. C4, plastic explosives. He began stuffing the putty into the holes he had drilled. He inserted blasting caps. He was wiring the house for demolition. "If the police come," his voice crackled over the speakers again, "I blow the support. The roof comes down. We all get buried. Just like Beirut. Symmetry, Chris. It is all about symmetry." I realized then that I had no time. I could not call the police. If they surrounded the house, if he saw a single flashing light, he would detonate the charges. He wanted to die here. He wanted to take the house and anyone inside it with him. I looked at the monitor. He was moving to the second column. He was efficient. He would have the whole ground floor rigged in 20 minutes. I looked at the hydraulic controls. I looked at the fire axe in my hand. I could not wait for him to make a mistake. He did not make mistakes. I had to change the environment. I had to take away his advantages. He had the light. He had the explosives. He had the high ground. I had the guts of the house. I walked over to the main power distribution panel for the sub-basement. The generator fed into this panel before distributing power upstairs. The transfer switch was automatic electronic, but the cables were physical. I grabbed a pair of insulated bolt cutters from the tool wall. They were heavy, with rubberized handles rated for 10,000 volts. I approached the thick black cable coming from the external generator feed. It was pulsing with lethal current. If I cut it, the arc flash could blind me. It could burn me. But if I did not cut it, he would blow up my home. I took a deep breath. I thought of Maya's room. I thought of him lying on her pillow. I clamped the jaws of the cutter around the cable. I turned my head away, squeezing my eyes shut. "Lights out, you son of a bitch," I whispered. I squeezed the handles with everything I had. The sound was like a shotgun blast next to my ear. A shower of sparks rained down, searing my neck. The smell of ozone filled the air, instantly. The hum of the generator outside continued, but the connection was severed. The sub-basement plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. I looked at the monitor. It was dead. The power to the cameras was gone. Upstairs, the lights would be out. Not just dimmed, gone. The smart locks were dead. The speakers were dead. The welding torch was dead. The house was now a tomb of silence and shadow. I dropped the bolt cutters. My hands were stinging, but I was alive. I picked up the fire axe. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small tactical flashlight, but I did not turn it on. I knew this house. I knew how many steps it was from the basement door to the kitchen island. I knew the height of every stair riser. Silas was an intruder. He needed eyes to see. I was the architect. I could see with my feet and my hands. I moved toward the ladder. The metal rungs were cold. I began to climb, ascending from the underworld into the belly of the beast. The hunt had begun. The darkness was absolute. It was not merely the absence of light. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of black velvet that pressed against my eyes. I stood at the top of the ladder in the pantry listening. The house, usually so full of the hum of electricity and the whisper of conditioned air, was dead silent. I had killed it. But in killing the house, I had created a new kind of ecosystem, one where sight was irrelevant and sound was currency. I knew Silas had night vision goggles. A specialist like him would never enter a hostile environment without thermal or infrared capabilities. He was currently standing in the living room, likely scanning the void with a green monochromatic clarity. To him, the room was bright. To him, I was a heat signature waiting to be extinguished. He had the technological advantage, but I had the architectural advantage. I did not need to see the floor to know where it was. I had poured the foundation. I had laid the tiles. I knew that the kitchen island was exactly 4 steps to my left. I knew that the transition from the hardwood of the hallway to the polished concrete of the living room was exactly 12 feet from the pantry door. My body knew this space better than my eyes ever could. It was muscle memory etched into my bones during 5 years of construction and 2 years of living. I heard a low, raspy chuckle echo from the foyer. "Marco," Silas whispered. He was enjoying this. He thought we were playing a game of tag where he was the only one with a flashlight. Bang. A gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet slammed into the drywall 3 feet to my right. He was not aiming at me yet. He was firing at the walls, trying to flush me out, trying to make me panic and run into his line of sight. "Polo," he taunted. Bang, another shot. This one took a chunk out of the kitchen cabinet. I did not flinch. I lowered my center of gravity, crouching low. I moved silently, rolling my feet from heel to toe to dampen the sound of my boots. I needed to get him away from the living room. The pillars were rigged with C4 explosives. If a stray bullet hit a blasting cap, the game was over. I needed a distraction, something large enough to pull his attention away from the ground floor. I made my way to the utility chase that ran behind the refrigerator. This was where the plumbing manifold for the fire suppression system was located. In a modern smart home, these valves are controlled electronically, but I had insisted on manual redundancy valves for maintenance. I felt for the cold brass wheel in the dark. I counted the valves. 1, 2, 3. Valve. 3 controlled the second-floor sprinkler zone, specifically the hallway outside Maya's room. I gripped the wheel and turned it hard to the left. Hiss. The sound of high-pressure water rushing through the pipes was immediate. Upstairs, directly above us, the sprinkler heads burst open. Water hammered against the floorboards, sounding like the heavy footsteps of a running man. "There you are," Silas hissed. I heard the heavy thud of his boots as he broke into a run. He was heading for the stairs. He thought I was making a break for the roof, or perhaps trying to get to the panic room. I waited until I heard him hit the landing on the second floor. Then I moved. I sprinted into the living room. I did not need to slow down. I knew exactly where the furniture was. I ghosted past the sofa, skirted the coffee table, and reached the first structural column. I dropped to my knees. My hands frantically searched the rough concrete surface. I felt the cold, malleable lump of the plastic explosive. I traced the wire leading out of it. It connected to a remote detonator receiver. I did not have time to be delicate. I gripped the blasting cap, a thin metal tube inserted into the explosive putty, and pulled. It slid out with a sickening squelch. I bit the wire, connecting it to the receiver, and yanked it free, tossing the cap across the room. 1 down. I scrambled on all fours to the second column. Above me, the sound of running water was deafening, masking my movements. I heard Silas kicking doors open upstairs, his rage growing. "Come out," he roared. "Face me." I found the second charge. I ripped the detonator out. 2 down. I moved to the third. My fingers brushed against the C4. I was about to pull the cap when the water noise suddenly stopped. Silas had found the manual shutoff in the upstairs laundry room. He was smarter than I hoped. The silence returned heavier than before. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the clink-clank of a small metal object bouncing down the stairs. It hit the concrete floor of the living room and rolled toward me. Pop. A hissing sound erupted, followed instantly by the acrid chemical smell of burning potassium chlorate. Smoke. Silas had thrown a military-grade smoke grenade. At first, I did not understand. Why use smoke in a pitch-black room? Then I realized his tactic. He knew I was down here. He knew I was disarming the bombs. The smoke was not to blind me. I was already blind. The smoke was to scatter the infrared light of his night vision goggles. It would create a wall of static, yes, but it would also fill the room with choking, dense particulate matter. He was flushing me out like a rat in a burrow. The smoke hit me. It burned my eyes and throat. I clamped my mouth shut, trying to hold my breath, but my lungs were burning. I pulled the third detonator free and scrambled away from the column, retreating toward the central corridor. I heard Silas jump from the balcony. He did not take the stairs. He vaulted over the railing and landed with a heavy, wet thud in the center of the living room. He stood up, emerging from the smoke cloud like a demon. I could hear the whine of his night vision capacitors. "You disarmed my fireworks," he rasped, his voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You want to fight? Fine. No more explosions. Just meet." He holstered his gun. I heard the distinct shing of a knife being drawn from a Kydex sheath. I backed into the narrow hallway that connected the living room to the rear solarium. This hallway was my kill zone. It was 4 feet wide, lined with concrete. No room to maneuver, no room to flank. I drew my own weapon, not the gun, but the fire axe I had carried up from the basement. I held it across my chest. Silas lunged. I did not see him, but I felt the displacement of air. I swung the axe blindly, in a horizontal arc. Clang. The steel head of the axe collided with the wall, sparks flying. I had missed him. Something slammed into my chest. It felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. Silas drove his shoulder into me, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I flew backward, hitting the floor hard. The axe skittered away into the darkness. I scrambled backward, kicking out with my legs. My boot connected with something solid, his shin. He grunted, but did not stop. He was on top of me in an instant. His hand, strong as a vice, clamped around my throat. His other hand brought the knife down. I caught his wrist just in time. The tip of the blade hovered an inch from my eye. "Look at me!" he screamed, his spittle hitting my face. "Look at what you made!" He leaned in close. Even in the dark, I could smell the rot of his breath, the scent of old burns. He was pushing the knife down. He was incredibly strong, his muscles fueled by adrenaline and madness. My arm began to tremble. I was losing. I did the only thing I could do. I stopped fighting his arm and drove my knee up into his groin. It was a dirty move, a desperate move. Silas howled in pain and his grip loosened for a fraction of a second. I threw him off me and rolled to the side. The knife slashed down, missing my face but burying itself in the muscle of my left shoulder. A scream tore from my throat. The pain was white-hot, blinding. I felt the blade grate against the bone. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my bleeding shoulder. I ran. "Run!" Silas laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Run, architect!" I ran down the hallway, counting the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. I burst into the atrium. The atrium was the centerpiece of the house. It was a large circular room with a glass ceiling, now boarded up, and a floor made of polished black granite. In the center of the room was a large decorative space, intended for a 20-foot ficus tree. But there was no tree, just a flat expanse of granite. I stumbled to the far side of the room, leaning against the wall, gasping for air. Blood was soaking my shirt, warm and sticky. I could hear Silas entering the room behind me. He was not rushing now. He could smell the blood. He knew I was hurt. "Cornered," Silas whispered. "No more doors. No more tricks." I slid down the wall, sitting on the floor. I let my breathing become ragged and loud. I wanted him to think I was done. "Do it," I wheezed. "End it." Silas walked toward me. I could hear his boots clicking on the granite. Click, click, click. He was crossing the center of the room. He was walking right over the installation zone. "I am not going to kill you yet," Silas said, stepping closer. "First, I am going to peel your face off. I want to wear it while I wait for your daughter." He was 6 feet away, 5 feet. My right hand, hidden behind my back, fumbled for the small, recessed panel in the baseboard. It was a maintenance switch designed to lower the floor of the planter for soil replacement. "Goodbye, Silas," I said. "Goodbye, cry." I pressed the button. Whoosh! The hydraulic locks released instantly. The center 10 feet of the floor, a massive slab of granite, did not just lower, it dropped. It was a gravity drop mechanism designed to slam open to allow a crane to lower a root ball. The floor beneath Silas vanished. He let out a short, surprised gasp as he fell. I watched his shadow disappear into the hole. I waited for the thud of him hitting the sub-basement floor 20 feet below. But there was no thud. There was a scraping sound, metal on stone. I dragged myself up and crawled to the edge of the pit. I pulled the tactical flashlight from my pocket and shone it down. Silas had not fallen to the bottom. He was hanging there, 5 feet down. His combat knife, which he must have slammed into the concrete wall of the shaft as he fell, was wedged into a seam in the foundation. He was dangling by one hand, gripping the handle of the knife. He looked up at me. The beam of my light illuminated his ruined face. His night vision goggles had been knocked askew, hanging from his neck. His eyes, one wide and one sewn shut, locked onto mine. He did not look afraid. He looked furious. He began to pull himself up. He was doing a one-armed pull-up, dragging his body weight up the sheer concrete wall. His fingers clawed at the edge of the granite slab. "You missed," he snarled, his voice echoing in the shaft. I stared at him. He was relentless. He was a force of nature that refused to die. "I did not miss," I said, my voice cold. I looked at the control panel on the wall near me. There was a second button, a button labeled Vacuum Seal. The atrium was not just a garden. It was designed as a quarantine zone for exotic plants that required specific atmospheric conditions. It could be sealed airtight, but Silas was climbing fast. His hand hooked over the edge of the floor. He was pulling himself out of the pit. I stood up, ignoring the screaming pain in my shoulder. I kicked his hand. He roared and grabbed my ankle. His grip was like iron. He yanked hard, trying to pull me into the pit with him. I fell forward, slamming my chest against the edge. I looked down into the abyss. If I fell, I was dead. If he climbed up, I was dead. I saw the detonator for the C4 still clipped to his belt. He had not used it, but he still had it. I grabbed a loose piece of granite tile that had cracked during the floor drop. I raised it high and brought it down on his fingers with everything I had left. Crunch. Silas screamed. His grip failed. He slid back down the shaft, but he managed to catch the knife handle again. He was hanging there 10 feet down now. "I will kill you!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "I will burn this whole world down!" "You already did," I said. I rolled away from the edge and slammed my hand on the vacuum seal button. Glass panels slid out of the walls, rising up to meet the ceiling. The floor panels hissed as they locked into place, not covering the hole, but sealing the perimeter of the room. Silas was not trapped in the pit. He was trapped in the room, and I was on the outside. I looked through the glass. Silas had climbed out of the pit. He was standing in the center of the atrium, banging on the reinforced glass walls. He was screaming, but I could not hear him. The glass was soundproof. He looked at me, his eyes wild. Then he reached for the detonator on his belt. He held it up, pressing it against the glass. He was mouthing words. He pressed the trigger. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. He looked at it, confused. I pointed to the pile of detonators I had left in the living room. I held up the 3 blasting caps I had pulled. Silas froze. He realized he had lost his leverage. He was locked in a glass cage in the center of my house. But then he smiled. A terrible, jagged smile. He ripped his shirt open. Strapped to his chest was not a vest. It was a complex array of wiring and a central unit with a digital display. It was a dead man's switch. A heart rate monitor connected to a final block of explosives strapped directly to his torso. I saw the numbers on the display racing. 150 beats per minute. He pointed to the device, then to the house. He did not need the columns. He was the bomb. And if his heart stopped or if it beat too fast, he would take the atrium and the structural core of the house with him. He had turned himself into the final weapon. I stood on the other side of the reinforced glass, my chest heaving, the fire axe heavy in my hand. The atrium was now a cage, a transparent cylinder of high-strength polymer and laminated glass rising from the floor to the ceiling. Inside, Silas Vance stood on the narrow rim of the granite floor that remained around the gaping black hole of the maintenance pit. He was trapped between the glass wall and a 20-foot drop into the concrete sub-basement. He looked like a specimen in a jar, a monster preserved in formaldehyde. I reached for the wall panel and punched the button for the intercom. The system crackled to life, bridging the silence between us. "It is over, Silas," I said, my voice sounding tinny and flat through the speakers inside his cage. "You are locked in. The glass is bulletproof. It is blast-resistant. You cannot break it." Silas turned slowly. He ignored the glass. He ignored the drop behind him. He looked straight at me, his ruined face pressed against the transparent barrier. His eyes were wet manic, filled with a mixture of hatred and profound, crushing hurt. "Over!" he screamed. The sound tore through the intercom, distorted by the volume. "You think this is about winning or losing? You think this is a game?" He slammed his fist against the glass. A bloody smear was left behind. "You left me," he roared. "You chose the data. You chose the company. We were brothers, Chris. I trusted you with my life, and you looked at a screen, did the math, and decided I was expendable." He ripped the shreds of his tattered shirt, exposing the thick, ropey scars that covered his chest and arms. "Look at me," he sobbed, the anger collapsing into grief. "I burned for 20 minutes. I felt my skin melt. I felt my eyelids fuse shut. And the last thing I saw before the fire took my eyes was the green light on the door lock. Your lock. You engaged it. I lowered the axe. My own heart was hammering against my ribs, but it was not from fear. It was from the weight of a guilt I had carried for 7 years. I had buried it under whiskey and work, but now it was staring back at me. "I did not order the lockdown," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the house it carried. Silas froze. He blinked his expression, twisting into a sneer. "Liar. You were the architect. You had the command codes." "I had the codes," I admitted. "But I did not use them. I was screaming at them to abort. I was trying to override the system." I stepped closer to the glass until my forehead was almost touching his, separated only by 2 inches of laminate. "Aegis Dynamics initiated the protocol," I said, stressing every word. "They had a remote backdoor. When the breach alarm tripped, headquarters in Virginia panicked. They did not care about the asset. They did not care about the team. They cared about the server. They sealed the room from Langley." "Bullshit!" Silas spat. "You are lying to save your conscience." "Am I?" I reached into my back pocket. I pulled out the folded, crumpled dossier I had printed from the file Barron had sent me. It was the internal incident report, the real one, not the sanitized version released to the public. I pressed the first page against the glass. "Read it," I commanded. "Look at the timestamp. Look at the authorization code." Silas stared at the paper. His good eye darted back and forth reading the text. "Authorization, override command. Source, Aegis Central Command. User, Director Sterling. Status, asset containment. Personnel, expendable." "Expendable," I read aloud. "That is what they called us, Silas, both of us." Silas staggered back. He looked as if he had been punched. The paper trembled in my hand as I pressed the next page against the glass. "And read the rescue log," I continued. "They said the site was too hot. They said no one could survive. They pulled the team back." I took a deep breath, and the familiar painful wheeze rattled in my chest, the sound that had plagued me for 7 years. "I went back in," I said. "I violated orders. I drove a truck through the perimeter wall. I crawled into the ventilation tunnels looking for you. The smoke was so thick I could not see my own hands." I tapped my chest, right over my lungs. "Why do you think I built a house in the clean air of the mountains, Silas? Why do you think I have an oxygen tank in my bedroom? I did not get this cough from smoking. I burned my lungs out trying to find your body." Silas stared at me. His hand, which had been hovering near the detonator on his chest, dropped to his side. The rage that had fueled him for 7 years, the singular focus that had kept him alive through the pain of the skin grafts and the surgeries, began to waver. He looked down at the dossier against the glass. He saw the truth printed in black and white. He saw the signature of the man who had actually condemned him. Our boss, the man who had spoken at his memorial service. "You came back," Silas whispered. His voice was small, like a child lost in the dark. "I came back," I said. "I found your helmet. It was melted. I thought you were Ash Silas. I mourned you. Every single day." For a moment, just a fleeting second, I saw the man I used to know. I saw the brilliant engineer, the sarcastic friend who loved bad coffee and worse jokes. I saw the human being beneath the monster. But the moment passed. The damage was too deep. The fire had burned away more than just his skin. It had burned away his capacity for redemption. His mind had been reconstructed around a single pillar of hate, and without that hate, he had nothing to hold it up. He began to laugh. It was a low, dry sound that built into a cackle. He shook his head, tears streaming down his scarred cheeks, mixing with the soot and blood. "It does not matter," he wheezed. "It is too late, Chris. The concrete is already poured." He stepped back to the edge of the pit. He looked down into the darkness, then back at me. "We are both ghosts," he said. "I am just the one who looks like it." He tapped the device strapped to his chest. The digital display was glowing red, 120 beats per minute. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice regaining its manic edge. "A dead man's switch," I said. "Smarter than that," Silas grinned, revealing his teeth. "It is a biometric trigger. It is linked to my pulse. If my heart stops, the circuit closes and the C4 explodes. But here is the catch: if my heart rate goes above 140, it also explodes." He took a step closer to the edge of the abyss. He was balancing on his heels, swaying over the drop. "I am excited, Chris," he whispered. "My heart is racing." "Can you see the numbers climbing? 125. 130. I looked at the display. The numbers were ticking up. He was inducing an adrenaline spike. He was willing his own heart to beat faster. "Silas, do not do this," I said, my hand hovering over the control panel. "We can fix this. I can get a team. We can disarm it." "No," he said. "I do not want to be fixed. I want to rest, and I want you to come with me." He spread his arms wide like a twisted messiah, welcoming the end of the world. "This house is a tomb, Chris. It always was. You built it for us. Let's lie in it together." 135. I looked at him. I looked at the bomb. I realized with a cold, absolute clarity that Silas Vance was already dead. The man standing in front of me was just a biological containment unit for a bomb. He had no intention of walking out of here. He wanted the explosion. He wanted the finality. And he wanted my wife and daughter to come home to a crater. I could not save him. I could only contain the damage. "I am sorry, Silas," I whispered. "I did not pull the trigger of my gun. A bullet would stop his heart, and a stopped heart meant detonation." Instead, I moved my hand to the second button on the panel, the one labeled vacuum lock. This system was designed to protect the house from a chemical attack or a fire in the atrium. It did not just seal the room, it purged it. It was connected to a high-velocity extraction system that could suck the air out of the chamber in under 30 seconds, creating a near vacuum. "Goodbye, brother," I said. I slammed my fist onto the button. Thumb! The sound of the massive intake valves opening was like a jet engine starting up. The air inside the glass cage was violently ripped away. Silas's eyes went wide. He gasped, but there was no air to inhale. The pressure drop was instant and catastrophic. His clothes billowed outward. He grabbed his throat, his mouth opening in a silent scream. I watched the heart rate monitor on his chest. 138, 139. He was panicking. The lack of oxygen was sending his heart into overdrive. He was seconds away from the trigger point. But then, the hypoxia hit. Without oxygen, the brain begins to shut down immediately. The panic signals stop. The body goes limp. I watched as Silas's knees buckled. He slumped against the glass wall, sliding down slowly. His eyes rolled back in his head. The numbers on the display froze. 139. Then they began to drop. 135, 130, 120. As he lost consciousness, his heart rate slowed. The adrenaline faded. He was not dead. Not yet. But he was incapacitated. He was suspended in a glass coffin, deprived of the air that fed the fire in his blood. I stood there watching the numbers fall, my hands still pressed against the cold glass. I was breathing hard, gulping down the air that he could no longer reach. I had won. But as I looked at the broken man slumped on the floor of my masterpiece, It did not feel like a victory. It felt like I was burying him all over again. The glass walls of the atrium stood like a monolith in the center of the house. I watched through the transparent barrier as Silas Vance clawed his way back from the brink of unconsciousness. The initial shock of the pressure drop had dropped him to his knees, but the human survival instinct is a violent thing. It overrides logic. It overrides pain. Silas scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving as he tried to suck in air that was rapidly thinning. He slammed his fists against the laminate, his face pressed to the glass, a mask of pure, oxygen-starved panic. He was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at the reflection of the device strapped to his chest. The red numbers on the digital display were flickering. They were no longer dropping. The panic of suffocation had triggered a massive adrenaline dump. 140. 142. The bomb was armed. The trigger threshold had been breached. The only reason it had not detonated yet was the 3-second fail-safe delay built into the circuit to prevent accidental misfires from hiccups or sneezes. The numbers flashed violently. 145. He was screaming, but in the vacuum-sealed chamber, it was a silent movie. His mouth opened wide as cords, straining, but no sound escaped. He was banging on the glass, the vibrations humming through the floor. He wanted out. He wanted air. And his terror was about to kill us both. I looked at the control panel. The vacuum system was too slow. It pulled the air out, but it did not lower the temperature fast enough to slow his metabolic rate. I needed to put him to sleep. I needed to freeze him. I needed to turn him off before he exploded. My hand hovered over the emergency fire suppression switch. It was a system I had designed for the server room, but I had routed a secondary dump valve to the atrium to protect the rare orchids I had planned to grow there. It used halon gas. Halon is an effective fire suppressant because it chemically disrupts combustion. It is also heavier than air, and when released from a pressurized tank, it comes out at freezing temperatures. It displaces oxygen instantly. If I flooded the chamber, the temperature inside would drop to near freezing in seconds. The gas would replace what little oxygen was left. It would force his body into a state of thermal shock and hypoxia. His heart rate would not just drop, it would plummet as his body tried to conserve heat. It was a gamble. If the shock killed him, the bomb would go off. If he stayed awake too long, the bomb would go off. I had to thread the needle between murder and preservation. "Go to sleep, Silas," I whispered. I smashed the plastic safety cover and flipped the toggle switch. Hiss! The sound was distinct, sharper than the vacuum pumps. High-velocity jets located in the ceiling of the glass cage erupted. A thick, white fog poured into the atrium. It looked like liquid smoke cascading down the glass walls, pooling on the floor, and rising rapidly. Inside the cage, Silas looked up. The white mist hit him. He recoiled. The cold was absolute. I saw condensation instantly form on the inside of the glass, obscuring my view. The temperature inside that room was dropping by 40 degrees every 10 seconds. Silas staggered. The cold shocked his system. He wrapped his arms around himself, his teeth chattering so violently I could almost feel it through the floor. The white fog swallowed his legs, then his waist. I stepped closer to the glass, wiping away the condensation on my side with a bloody hand. I needed to see the numbers. Silas fell back against the glass. He slid down, leaving a trail of fog on the pane. His eyes were fluttering. The combination of the freezing gas and the lack of oxygen was hitting him like a sledgehammer. The fight went out of him. The rage that had sustained him for 7 years was extinguished by the laws of thermodynamics. He slumped into a seated position, his head lolling forward. The fog swirled around him, burying him in a cloud of white. I pressed my face to the glass, searching for the red glow of the detonator. There, through the mist. 110, 95, 80. It was working. The thermal shock was slowing his metabolism. His body was shunting blood to the core to survive the cold, slowing the heart to a crawl. He was entering a state of artificial hibernation. 60, 55. He was unconscious, but he was alive. The bomb was dormant. I let out a breath that felt like it contained pieces of my own soul. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. The fire axe slipped from my hand and clattered onto the granite. My shoulder was throbbing with a dull, sickening rhythm. I looked down at my shirt. It was soaked through with red. I was losing blood fast. The house was silent again. The only sound was the faint hiss of the halon system topping off the pressure in the cage. Then the silence was broken. Crash. The front door, the heavy oak and steel barrier that Silas had locked so carefully, exploded inward. A battering ram hit it with the force of a truck. "Police! Federal agents! Go! Go! Go!" The shout was a cacophony of overlapping voices. Heavy boots hammered against the hardwood floor of the foyer. Beams of tactical lights swept through the darkness, cutting through the gloom like lightsabers. I did not move. I did not raise my hands. I just sat there leaning against the glass wall of the cage, watching the white fog swirl inside. Clear left. Clear right. Contact. Man down in the atrium. 3 figures clad in heavy body armor and helmets swarmed into the room. They had assault rifles raised, aiming at my chest. "Drop the weapon! Hands where I can see them!" one of them screamed. I nodded weakly toward the axe lying 5 feet away. I slowly raised my good hand. My left arm hung uselessly at my side. "Do not shoot the glass," I rasped, my voice barely audible. The lead officer advanced, kicking the axe away. He knelt beside me, keeping his weapon trained on my face. "Identify yourself." "Christopher Miller," I whispered. "Owner." "Where is the hostile?" I pointed a shaking finger at the glass cage behind me. "Inside. He is wearing a bomb. Dead man switch. Do not open the door. The temperature keeps him stable." The officer looked through the glass. He saw the figure slumped in the fog. He saw the red glow on the chest. "Jesus Christ," the officer muttered. He tapped his radio. "Command, we have a code red. Confirmed explosive device on the suspect. Suspect is contained in some kind of glass cell. We need the bomb squad, now." Everything blurred after that. Paramedics arrived, but the SWAT team would not let them near me until the area was secured. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the bomb squad technicians set up their equipment. They moved with the slow, deliberate grace of people who work with death. They set up a portable laser cutter. They drilled a small hole in the glass, careful not to shatter the integrity of the vacuum seal. They inserted a fiber optic probe. I watched as a technician in a blast suit manipulated a robotic arm through the access port. He was working on the wiring of the vest, guided by the camera feed. Silas did not move. He sat there frozen in time, a statue of vengeance that had run out of heat. Snip. The red light on the chest harness went dark. "Device is inert," the technician announced. "Repeat, device is inert." The tension in the room snapped like a rubber band. The paramedics rushed in. I felt a needle in my arm, then a rush of warmth. They lifted me onto a gurney. As they wheeled me out, I turned my head. I wanted one last look. They were opening the glass door. 2 officers were dragging Silas out. He was stiff, his skin pale and blue from the cold and the gas. He looked small. The monster that had terrorized me, that had lived in my walls and slept in my daughter's bed, was just a broken man in a gray t-shirt. He opened his eyes. It was just for a second. As they dragged him past my gurney, his single good eye locked onto mine. It was not filled with hate anymore. It was empty. It was a void. He had played his game and he had lost. He was returning to the prison system, to a cage much smaller and less comfortable than the one he had built in my house. They loaded me into the back of the ambulance. The cool night air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and diesel exhaust. "We are going to take you to St. Mary's, Mr. Miller," the paramedic said, adjusting the IV drip. "You have lost a lot of blood, but you are going to be fine." I looked out the back doors of the ambulance before they closed. The house stood against the night sky. The floodlights from the police cruisers illuminated the brutalist concrete facade. It was scarred. There were bullet holes in the walls. The windows were welded shut with steel plates. The front door was unhinged. It was still standing. It had survived the assault. But as I looked at it, I felt nothing. The pride I used to feel for its lines and its strength was gone. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a crime scene. It was a monument to a war I never wanted to fight. I knew with absolute certainty that I would never sleep under that roof again. I would sell it, I would let the bulldozers come. My phone, which the police had recovered from the floor and placed in a plastic evidence bag next to me, buzzed. I reached out with my good hand and took it. A text message from Maya. "Dad, are you okay? Mom is crying. Please tell me you are okay." I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed slowly, one letter at a time. "I am safe. No more breathing in the wall, sweetheart. It is all over." I hit send. The paramedic closed the ambulance doors. The view of the house vanished, replaced by the sterile white interior of the vehicle. I closed my eyes and listened to the siren wail as we drove away, leaving the ghosts behind in the forest. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening from a quiet room on your commute? Or maybe in the dark before bed? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel, Calm Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who love a good thriller. Stay safe and check your closets.